Another mass shooting. What will it take to make America safer? Chief Craig comments on terrorism and armed Detroiters, the state of education in Michigan, and full-time pay for a part-time job in Wayne County. MiWeek starts right now.
Recently, Michigan's economy has begun to turn around. Michigan's gained over 250,000 new jobs. We've paid off $20 billion in long-term debt. And our population is increasing for the first time in a decade. But to make Michigan a top 10 state, there's still plenty of work to be done. Step up and help put Michigan on top. Learn what you can do at MichiganTurnaroundPlan.com.
Funding is also provided by Delta.
Hi there and welcome to MiWeek. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christy McDonald. It is not the kind of news that we like starting out with, but sadly it's happened again. A shooting in California that has left more than a dozen people dead and just as many injured. President Obama is calling for a bipartisan effort to address mass shootings. So coming up, what is the answer to preventing tragedies such as this one? Would stricter gun control laws make a difference? We will debate all the options. Also coming up, Police Chief James Craig draws attention with his comments on why Detroit is not a prime target for terrorists. Plus, we'll look at the state of education in Michigan when I talk with the head of the Education Trust Midwest. And Michigan's best part-time job could very well be that of Wayne County Commissioner. We will talk about the real cost to the county. But we do start tonight with the story that is topping the headlines. 2 gunmen opened fire in a social services agency in San Bernardino, California, killing 14 people, wounding 17 others. President Obama says this type of gun violence has become too common in the United States, and that is where we start tonight with our contributors, Nolan Finley from the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson from the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, it's good to see you after the Thanksgiving holiday. But to start like this and to start with a debate again that I feel like that we've been going round and round in this country for the last especially year or so, given the number of mass shootings we've had, is depressing again, quite honestly, Nolan.
Well, of course, but I mean, we still don't know what was going on there. I think it's, we still don't know the motive. And until you know the motive and until you know what was driving this, what was behind it, I think talking about remedies is premature. I mean, if it was terrorism, then that's a whole different aspect than if it was, for example, workplace violence. I mean, then you're dealing with a whole different set of remedies, between the two.
I think you still also are talking about access to guns, though, in a larger scope.
That's what's common across all of the things you just talked about. Workplace violence, terrorism, all of these things depend on the easy access to weapons that we insist is part of our culture here. And at some point, I think it's worth at least a discussion about why that's true. Why do we cling to that in the face of a national crisis? This is the 355th mass shooting in the country this year. 355. I'm not sure why we think any sort of constitutional protection ought to prevent us from reassessing the impact of that on this country.
Steve, it's not like we don't have gun laws. We've got a tremendous amount of gun laws. This occurred in the state, in the country, with the tightest gun laws, and we know at least 2 of the guns that they found so far were legally purchased.
But that's an oxymoron that gets pushed by the gun lobby all the time. The idea,
it's not the gun lobby. I mean, it's California that has the toughest laws in the country, and these were legally purchased guns. Right, at least the 2 they've traced so far.
But because the laws vary from state to state, the New York Times had a wonderful graphic 2 weeks ago about where guns come from. Where do guns in California come from? They don't come from California. 90% of them come from Arizona next door, which has almost no gun laws like California. In New York, same thing. Most of the guns come from the South, from Virginia, from Alabama, from states that don't do this. This is not a state-by-state, hold on, this is not a state-by-state issue. This is a national issue. This is about how we as a country want to deal with firearms. And
we have layer after layer of federal gun laws, and the difference between what makes this difference, if it's terrorism or some other motivation. I mean, if it's terrorism, that the challenge of keeping guns out of the hand becomes so much harder, as we saw in France. France, you can't buy guns, and France has federal gun policies, but they manage to smuggle in the guns to the terrorists. That's a whole different
Okay,
animal.
all right, but let me ask this though. You can say what would we? You can say
355 times.
Guys, hang on. You can say what would have prevented what happened yesterday. That maybe no law in the book could have prevented what happened yesterday. But I think though you have to go beyond looking at a specific incident and look at the whole and start talking about, do we start chipping away though? That's not an excuse to then not do anything, because it wouldn't have prevented exactly
what
happened
would you do?
yesterday.
I mean, that's what everybody says. You hear folks saying, well, common sense gun laws. There's 300 million guns in circulation in this country. You tell me what common sense gun laws would keep people from getting their hands on guns.
Well, here's a list. One, holding gun owners responsible when their guns go missing and end up involved in a crime. That happens more often than not.
That wasn't the case in this one.
We don't know what the case was here, but most gun crimes in this country are committed with guns that were at one time bought legally. So you buy a gun,
of course.
I buy a gun. I lost it, or I sold it to my friend. It ends up in a kid's hand in Detroit doing something that he's not supposed to do. You or I should be held to some level of accountability for that. How about gun manufacturers? I mean, the idea that you can just make these things that take people's lives and there's no liability. There's no other industry that's shielded from that kind of liability. Why are they?
Every industry has that kind of liability if their product's defective. No other industry is liable for their product if it is used.
If it works the right way.
If it works the right way.
Right.
I mean, you're going to extend that to the auto industry? Somebody commits a crime with a car.
Here's
they're going to, the
here's
auto
another
company's
idea.
going to be liable?
Here's another idea. Guns are protected by the Second Amendment. Ammunition is not. We could regulate the sale of ammunition far more than we do, which would
is a backdoor assault on the Second Amendment, and it affects legal gun owners more than illegal gun owners.
What about the high capacity ammunition?
Right.
What about limiting the rounds?
These guys didn't in California. You can't have high capacity rounds. These guys didn't have high capacity rounds in their pockets.
I think all of the ammunition can be regulated far more than we do.
By regulated, you mean cut off, and if what we're talking about here,
but if you're a legal gun owner, what's the matter
cutting
with
off legal gun sales and legal gun ownership? And that, when you say, oh, common sense gun control, what that means is either confiscating guns, because you're not going to fix this as long as 300 million guns are in circulation, or not have any more gun sales in this country whatsoever. If that's what you want, say what you want, instead of talking around it with all of these backdoor stuff.
I think the problem is that legal gun owners have been able to hide under a shroud of this idea that somehow what they're doing and what they're involved in is completely separate from the violence that we see from illegal gun ownership. And the truth is that they are not. They are inextricably linked in this country.
Then you have to end legal gun ownership in this country.
And if you deal with the Second Amendment. Well, the first thing I'm saying is let's deal with the link. Maybe let's try to break the link between those two things.
So what you're going to have is anybody
I'm okay with reconsidering. I'm okay with reconsidering the idea of mass gun ownership. I don't think it's a great idea.
And then that's what you ought to say. I mean, if it's confiscating guns, if it's limiting gun ownership, then you're talking about the Second Amendment. And so stop talking about common sense.
But you can't paint me into that corner if I'm not talking about
common sense gun measures as if it's simple little things we're going to do.
I think it's difficult to have a conversation about any kind of gun control when you say, well, if you are for some kind of reform, then you don't want guns at all. And I don't think that that's true.
Okay, Christy, tell me what reforms will work.
I just listed a bunch.
Those aren't going to cut down on shootings. What they're going to do is punish legal gun owners and restrict access to ammunition.
Holding legal gun owners responsible for what happens to their guns?
All you're going to do is fill the jails with homeowners whose houses got broken into, et cetera, et cetera. That's not going to stop.
I'm not on either side here, but I'm going to list off a couple things that I want you guys to both consider. So when we talk about certain things, what about people are talking about universal background checks, which people are around the country are in support of. Also, people are talking about restricting access to the people who are on the terrorist watch list and the no-fly zones. They're still allowed to legally buy guns in this
they
country.
Absolutely are not. If you buy a gun in Michigan, you go through an extensive federal background check.
If you buy from a gun shop, but not if you buy at a gun show.
If you buy from a licensed dealer at a gun show,
but if I buy a gun from you, I don't go through any of that.
That's absolutely true.
Well,
so
okay.
I mean,
you should not be able to, maybe you shouldn't be able to sell your gun to me. What's wrong with that? You should go to jail if you sell a gun to somebody. How about that?
Why in the world would you want to get in between a transaction between two legal citizens, two law-abiding citizens?
Because that's part of the flow of guns from legal ownership to
So
illegal
what if your
ownership.
dad wanted to leave his gun to you? What happens?
You shouldn't be able to do that.
You shouldn't be able to leave your gun to your
Not
son
without
or
some great big regulation. You can't leave anything. I mean, anything else that's regulated. Anything else that's regulated. I can't just give you my car.
You sure can.
Right? No, there has to be. There is a transaction that the state records. If I sell you my car, right? The title transfers. Why isn't that true for guns?
I mean, I guess we have a Second Amendment. If you want to do
okay,
if you want to do
if
that,
the Second Amendment is just a free-for-all, then let's not have any debate about it.
If you want to do that, and then you say that's going to stop this, I don't think it's going to stop this.
Sure, it will.
I think as long as you have, as long as you have guns in circulation, the people who misuse guns are going to find a way to get
But that kind of zero-sum argument then says, then let's talk about the Second Amendment. Then.
We have, Steve, we have layered and layered and layered gun laws in this country.
Very sloppy. Very sloppy.
This is the most regulated industry in the country.
Patchwork. It's a patchwork.
And we've layered on and on and on, and the mass shootings haven't stopped.
Yeah, they haven't stopped because...
But gun violence on a whole in this country has declined remarkably over the last 25 years.
It depends on where you live. That's not true in some place like...
It depends on the country as a whole. It's down 40% in 25 years.
If I live in Detroit, do you think gun violence is much lower than it was 25 years ago?
So is the problem guns, or is there something else going on in Detroit?
Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about where gun violence comes from. I mean, you just had doctors in Washington, D.C. lobbying Congress saying, why don't we get some kind of federal funding that we haven't had for the last 20 years to study the effects of gun violence? The CDC wants this. Is that part of the equation? Could that be part of the solution?
I mean, it's all part of the solution. But I mean, how deep do you want to go? What amongst young gun buyers, what's the most popular gun? These AK-47s, because they look like the guns they shoot in their video games. So I mean, where do you go in terms of examining your culture?
All right, I also want to take this a little forward to what Police Chief James Craig said this week, because while we are still looking at this shooting situation in California, and while we don't know if exactly it was workplace, if it exactly was some kind of terrorist act that had ties or motivation from overseas, it was interesting that Chief said this week that no one would attack Detroit because of the amount of people that carry guns in the city of Detroit, that terrorists or anyone else wouldn't want to come up against a populace that are carrying weapons themselves.
That was an unusual theory. But I mean, I guess if you looked at those people in California who are cowering in those offices, locked themselves in offices, unable to defend themselves, defenseless in there, while people march through shooting them, I bet a few of them wish they'd had a gun in their pocket.
What did you think about what he said?
Well, I mean, again, he's courting this idea that somehow legal gun ownership and more legal gun ownership is disconnected from the flow of illegal guns in our communities. And I keep saying that's just not true.
How many people haven't been shot because they had a legal gun?
Well, how many people
in this city?
Well, we don't know that. What we do know is that
we certainly know it because we know the amount of people
climbing
through windows.
But here's what we do know. We do know that we're close to 300 murders in the city this year, right? We're coming up on 300.
How many of those were by legal gun owners? People
almost none of them. Almost none of them. Nolan, you know that.
So you know that
the people walking around.
Unless you take every gun in this country, you're not going to keep guns out of the hands of criminals.
Well, the idea that there's
guns out of the hands of legal gun owners who use them.
And again,
so you really
that's the zero-sum argument. Yeah, that's the zero-sum argument that the gun lobby loves.
As long as guns are in circulation, people who want to use them to do harm or use them illegally are going to have access.
So we're all defenseless.
You're defenseless. You can defend yourself if you have access.
So everyone just got to arm up and we'll have shootouts.
I'm with
Craig. Now that is not a valid argument. My thing is, I just don't want to have to explain to my kids again almost every week of what's going on in the news. What happened today? It's
this year.
So why don't we start having a real conversation about why we're such a violent culture?
All right, Nolan.
I don't think it's simply access to guns.
I don't think that's.
I think it's all part. I don't think it's just.
Right.
It's not just one
separating
simple
that out.
thing.
It's all of these
things. But you pretend we don't have gun laws and we don't have background checks. We have extensive
We have
gun
very
laws,
sloppy
and we have extensive
gun laws.
background checks.
We have very sloppy gun laws.
You can add another layer or two. I don't think it's going to stop what's happening in California.
In other countries, the gun laws are effective at keeping guns away from people who are going to do bad things.
Certainly didn't in Paris.
Why is it different?
This year.
So why is it different?
Certainly didn't in Germany.
Well,
They've had 5 school shootings. You pretend these
those
things
countries
don't happen
have murder
in other
rates that are a
countries.
fraction of ours.
And I don't think that's all about access to weapons.
Okay.
All right, guys. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. On this program, we talk a lot about the efforts to improve education in Michigan, and the Education Trust Midwest has set a goal of transforming Michigan into a top 10 education state. I sat down with the group's executive director, Amber Arellano, to get an update on the status of education in Michigan. Amber, let's start with the numbers that seem to be in a free fall that we heard from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Michigan 41st in the country when it comes to reading, and definitely below the national average in math in 4th and 8th grade. What do you make of those statistics?
Yeah, we have been seeing a dramatic decline now for well over a decade. In fact, Michigan is now only one of 6 states in the country where our 4th graders are learning at lower levels today than they were in 2001. So the data continues to be pretty devastating, and we've really got to look deeply at what we're not doing compared to what the states around the country are doing. That really kind of gives us a roadmap to give us a sense of where we need to go next and to turn this around.
All right, well, we hear from the governor and we hear from the state superintendent that Michigan should be a top 10 state in the next 10 years. What do we need to do to make this happen? Because clearly what's happening here,
right.
Or what's not happening here.
What's not happening, yeah. So what we know is that there are states around the country now that have been making enormous gains in student learning. For example, Tennessee, just a decade ago, was far underperforming Michigan for almost every subject and every group of students. And today they are now outpacing us for student growth, and they're on track to be a top 10 state within the next 5 years. So states like that really give us a good sense of where we need to go and what are we not doing, right? One thing that we're not doing is that we're not really investing in our school talent and better supporting teachers and principals in schools. You know, anybody who's taught, my first job was as a high school teacher outside of Flint. It's a tough job, and teaching is very complex. It takes a complex set of skills that I think we often underestimate in our state. So these states have done a lot to invest in those skills and to do better supports for teachers and principals, better training. In Tennessee, for example, they invested well over $150 million in helping teachers learn and teach at higher levels. There's been also efforts to make sure that funding formulas are more equitable in places like Massachusetts, so that low-income kids are getting more resources that they often need to catch up with their more affluent peers. And then there's a greater accountability in other states for performance, and we have not really taken accountability seriously in our state for teaching and learning.
Before we get to accountability, what kind of disparity are we seeing for low-income students in the state of Michigan versus districts that may be a little bit more flush?
Well, we're actually in the bottom 10 states now for funding equity. So that means that our high poverty districts and our wealthier districts, the gap in terms of funding is thousands of dollars per student. And that does make a difference, right? I mean, when kids are coming into school behind, we already know that kids in very high poverty neighborhoods are already behind by 1st and 2nd grade. They need more resources in order to help them catch up. You know, poverty is not destiny. And we've seen this all over the country. We've seen where African American students are far outpacing. I mean, I'm talking about 2 years more of growth and learning per year than our African American students are seeing in Michigan. So, you know, we can turn this around. Other states have turned their systems around within 5 years, and we can do that too. But we've really got to get focused on the things that really matter in terms of teaching and learning.
All right, so you're talking a lot about teacher effectiveness, and we've seen studies that makes a huge difference in the classroom. Do you think that we have now effectively put in place a teacher evaluation system that will work for the state?
Well, the good news is that we are on our way now, and that had been held up for a few years. The governor just signed into law a new teacher evaluation and support system for the state. We've never had that as a state. There are states that have now had those kinds of systems in place for more than 20 years. So we're now taking a step in the right direction. The question is now, how do we do that well? How do we implement it? What kind of resources will that need? And that's going to take a lot of state leadership at the Michigan Department of Education.
Our thanks to Amber, and if you want to see that entire interview, just go to MiWeek.org. We'll have it for you there. Turning now to Wayne County, are the salaries and the benefits for the county commissioners draining a budget that's already pretty much underwater? In his Sunday column, Nolan wrote about the commissioners' nearly $70,000 a year salary and retirement benefits. It's pretty good compensation for a part-time job, but it may not be good for a county trying to avoid bankruptcy. All right, Nolan, so was your voicemail box full
Well,
after this one, or what?
Particularly amongst county workers who've been really hit hard in this last contract as they try to erase this enormous deficit and pay down, avoid bankruptcy. And you've got the county commissioners basically excusing themselves from sacrifice. $70,000 a year. They meet twice a month in full session, a couple of times in committee. Some of them have other full-time jobs. And you've got Gary Warrencheck, the chairman, out here this week saying, oh gosh, it's not true, we're not stuffing our pockets. You know, you listen to his language, he said, yeah, we get health benefits, but most of us won't use them. Well, how do we know that? If you're not, he said, well, because we have insurance from our other jobs. Well, if you've got other jobs, you're probably not, the defense that you're actually full-time, which is another canard he's telling, is, you know, doesn't hold water. I mean, I covered this commission when the county charter, the new county charter came into effect. I talked to George Ward the other day, who was the charter commissioner when the charter was written. He helped write the charter. He said they absolutely intended for this commission to be part-time. And over the years, they've managed to work their pay up to $70,000 a year to meet twice a month in committee, twice a month in full session, 4 times a month. That's twice as much as what Oakland gets. It's more than twice as much as what Macomb gets. I mean, it's the biggest ripoff in Michigan.
And so who, do they vote for their own pay raises too, or who?
They have
who
a
gives them
compensation
raise?
committee, and it's like every other political body in the state. If you don't say I'm not taking it, you get it. So so you got to take a negative vote, not a positive vote. So they excuse themselves for responsibility. But I mean, they now have and if you look at the language he uses, he says post office benefits. You don't have to retire. You don't have to be 65 to get these. You could be 32, leave the commission, and for the rest of your life, you get health care.
I was going to say, chime in on this, Stephen.
The lifetime nature of some of what they're getting is, I think, what the problem is. Frankly, the $70,000, if you knocked it down to 40, that would be fine. How much money would that really save the county? There's not enough of them to really make a difference in the county's budget. I think there is an appearance problem, though, which is that
and a value problem. What's the work
what are we
worth?
getting for that? But that has to do with the people we elect, I think, to some degree on the commission. I don't know that going forward the sort of commission executive nature of Wayne County's government is sustainable because I think that the county is changing really dramatically. I think you need an executive because you've got so much stuff going on with the jail and the U.S. or the county prosecutor's office, the oversight there. But you know, I agree with you that there's something about this that doesn't look right.
And it's been going back for decades. I mean,
last 10 seconds,
yeah,
Nolan.
I mean, this has been their culture for decades. Anything they can do to enrich themselves, they do, while asking their employees to take a hit.
Good job if you can get it, hey? All right, and finally tonight, you know, next week marks the 1-year anniversary of Detroit emerging from bankruptcy. Detroit Public Television is a partner in a special event on December 9th, looking at where the city stands today. Detroit bankruptcy 1 year later is presented by the Detroit Journalism Cooperative. It is a free community event at Wayne State University's Community Arts Auditorium. It's at 6 o'clock in the evening, hosted by WDET Radio. Special guests include Governor Rick Snyder. He'll be there. Also Mayor Mike Duggan and retired bankruptcy Judge Stephen Rhodes. Detroit Public TV will live stream the program, so you can find it online. Nolan, Stephen, and I will be there, and we'll be bringing you highlights in a special edition of My Week next Thursday night. That is going to do it for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll continue our conversation now online, so go to myweek.org for an extra segment that you won't see on TV. We're also on Facebook. We're on Twitter during the week. Make sure you connect with us there. I'm Christy McDonald. For all of us at Detroit Public TV, we will see you next week.